Welcome back to new session. This is your PMP coach Anand. We are continuing with scope management knowledge area. This session will cover collect requirements process. The learning objective of this session are we'll start with the overview to understand what is collect requirement means. We'll go through collect requirement definition. We'll talk about what are the different types of requirement, ITTOs. We'll focus on some of the key tools and techniques like focus group meetings and facilitated workshop, as well as we'll talk about what do you mean by requirements document, what are the content of it, and requirement traceability matrix. And we'll do a quick review. Let's start with list of 6 processes in scope management knowledge area. So first process is plan scope management. Second, collect requirement. This is what we are going to learn. Third, define scope. Fourth, create work breakdown structure. This is where we will finalize our scope baseline. First 4 processes are part of planning process group. Next is validate scope, which is business acceptance of a deliverable. And last one is control scope. This is where we will ensure whatever has been agreed as per scope baseline that get delivered, nothing less, nothing more. So last 2 processes, validate scope and control scope, are part of monitoring and controlling process group. So let's start understanding requirements. So what are requirements? Requirements are set of demands, necessities, needs and constraints highlighted by stakeholder. Customer may not always know what they want. Sometimes they can tell you what are their problems or constraints. And your project team or business analyst has to develop requirements based on the information provided by various stakeholders. Who provides the requirement? They can be specified in the project charter, business documents like a business case, or agreements, that is contracts with vendor or business partners, or from various stakeholders like sponsor. He will be able to provide critical strategic requirement. Sometime they might explain you must have requirements. Business users, SMEs, may provide business requirements. Operations, they might provide you requirements to ensure smooth operations of the system once it is handed over to them. And there can be requirements coming from various other stakeholders. They may provide stakeholder specific requirements. Who collects the requirement? Again, it can be a project manager who will collect project management requirement. Business analyst will collect business or stakeholder requirement. System analyst will collect system requirements, or quality analyst will collect quality requirement. Again, on a smaller project, most of these activities might be done by project manager or business analyst. But on a larger project, there will be various stakeholders, various team members who will be providing and collecting requirements. Let's look at a process definition. Collect requirement is a process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet the project objectives. Requirement should be unambiguous, means there should not be any contradiction between 2 or more requirements. It should be traceable, means there should be logical link between individual requirement and other systems. You can trace a single functional requirement backward to its origin, such as you can trace it to use cases, product features, or business rule. Requirement should be complete, it should be consistent and acceptable to all stakeholders. It means all stakeholders should agree unanimously on the given requirement. Collect requirement process is base for defining and managing the project scope, including product scope. There are different types of requirement: business requirement, stakeholder requirement, solution requirement, transition requirements, project requirement, quality requirement, health, safety. There can be different types based upon the industry in which you are executing the project. Let's try to understand them in detail. Business requirements. It describes the higher level need of the organization, business issues or opportunities, and the reason why project has been undertaken. The source of requirement can be found in project charter and or business case documents. Stakeholder requirements. It describes the needs of a stakeholder or stakeholder group. These requirements are found by engaging with various stakeholders. For example, in finance upgrade project, cashier may request a special barcode scanning feature on the invoice to reduce time taken to collect the money. Director may ask if there is outgoing payment above certain limit, then it should go through his approval. Solution requirement. It describes features, functions, and characteristics of the product, service, or result that will meet the business and stakeholder requirements. There are two subtypes of solution requirement, that's a functional requirement and non-functional requirement. I will talk about this later in the session. Transition requirements. It describes temporary capabilities such as data conversion and training requirement needed to transition from the current as-is state to the future to-be state. For example, in a software project, if project is replacing old legacy system, then there will be a requirement of migrating data from old system to the new system. Project requirement. It describes the action, processes, or other conditions the project need to meet. For example, what are the constraints on the budget, schedule, or quality? Project sponsor may say, this product deliverable has to be delivered before so and so date. Quality requirement. It helps you to capture any condition or criteria needed to validate the successful completion of project deliverable or fulfillment of other project requirements. As we discussed on previous slide, solution requirements are further grouped into functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements describe the behavior of the product. For example, business process, data, and interaction within the product. Non-functional requirements describes the environmental conditions or qualities required for the product to be effective. For example, security, reliability, performance, safety, level of service, supportability, etc. So let's talk about inputs, tools and techniques, and output. Inputs are project charter, project management plan, project documents, business documents, agreements, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. Project charter. The project charter is the output of create project charter process. Project charter is essentially the seed of the project because it contains high-level information on the project. This is probably the first place to look for project requirement. It contains project objectives. Sometimes it may also contain product characteristics. Project management plan. The component of project management plan that are used as inputs are scope management plan. It will describe how collect requirement process need to be done. Requirements management plan. It contains information on how to handle the requirements. It explains what information need to be captured on requirement traceability matrix and how RTM will be used to track requirements throughout the project. Stakeholder engagement plan. Project manager need to discuss and gather requirements from various stakeholders. They will also help in elaborating requirements written in the project charter and the business case. So stakeholder engagement plan will give you information on who the stakeholders are and what is their current level of project engagement. Project documents which may be considered as input for this process are assumption log, lesson learned register, and stakeholder register. Assumption log contains high-level strategic and operational assumptions and constraints. Those are identified in the business case and flown into the project charter. These high-level assumptions will be updated during the process based on the discussions and further stakeholder agreements. Lesson learned register. It provides information on effective techniques for requirements collection, especially if an organization has already executed similar project in the past. Stakeholder register contains stakeholder information. Project manager can identify stakeholders, those who can provide information on the requirements or help in requirements elaborations. It also contains information on stakeholders' expectations and level of engagement with the project. Business documents. There are two business documents which are developed before the project charter is created: business case and benefit management plan. Business case contains purpose or objective of the project, business needs of the project, and the strategic alignment of the project. As you know, stakeholders always like to give lots of requirement. If you are building 3-star hotel building, they may give you 5-star hotel requirements. These business documents help stakeholders to focus on the project objectives and the original needs and the benefit identified during the business case process. What are the tools and techniques used in collect requirement process? Expert judgment, data gathering, data analysis, decision making, data representation. So first 5 techniques are regular techniques. Then we have context diagram and prototype. Let's look into each one by one. Expert judgment. Different experts will be consulted to capture the requirement based upon what category of requirement you are gathering. For example, technical experts will be needed for solution requirement. Project sponsor or top management can be consulted for business requirement, yes, some specific critical requirement. Quality experts may be consulted for quality requirement. Data gathering. Now there are various data gathering techniques which can be used, like brainstorming, interviews, questionnaire surveys, benchmarking, and focus group meetings. Let's look into each one by one. Brainstorming. A general data gathering and creativity technique that can be used to generate and collect multiple ideas related to project and project requirements. Meeting is generally held with the team members and selected experts. Idea generation and idea selections are a part of brainstorming session, while problem identification occurs before the session and implementation is a post-session activity. Interviews. This is an approach to elicit information from stakeholders by directly talking to them. PM will use pre-written spontaneous questions. Interviews are useful to obtain confidential information. For example, in our finance upgrade project, director is requesting to automate a business process in such a way that minimum human intervention is required, and this means it will result into reducing the department size. Now, this kind of information can be captured through one-to-one interviews. Interviews will be held with stakeholders such as subject matter experts for the solution requirement. For example, IT system architect or performance requirement may come from architect. Other project manager with experience on similar project for a project requirements. Sponsors or other top executives can be interviewed to gather high-level requirements and business requirements. Questionnaires and surveys. These are written set of questions designed to quickly accumulate information from large number of respondents. They are most appropriate when used with mixed audiences, when quick turnaround is needed, and the respondents are geographically dispersed. Subject matter experts, stakeholders, or experienced project managers can be surveyed to collect specific requirement. Please note that questionnaire and surveys are easier to manage and facilitate than focus groups. Benchmarking. It is a comparison between the proposed product and those of competitive organization. Benchmarking can be used to identify best practices, generate ideas for improvement, and provide a basis for measuring performance. For example, if you are building a hospital and one of the objectives mentioned in the project charter is about constructing a green building for hospital, then project team will collect green building requirement from relevant stakeholders, and they can compare proposed requirement with the green building standards like Euro, World Green Building Council standard, or US's Energy Star standard. Sometimes stakeholder or client may say build product according to some standard. For example, build a phone which can satisfy IP65 rigidity standard. In this case, project team will document requirement by referring to those standards documents. The organization compared during the benchmarking can be internal or external. Focus group. An elicitation technique that brings together pre-qualified stakeholder and subject matter experts to understand their expectations and attitudes about proposed product, service, or result. Remember, a trained moderator is used in the focus group meetings. Data analysis. Once potential requirements are gathered from all stakeholders, you need to analyze those requirements. This is where document analysis technique will help. It will help you to elicit requirements by analyzing existing documentation and identify information relevant to requirements. There is a long list of documents that can be used in this analysis. Business plans, documents like business case and benefit management plan for business requirement, use cases, request for proposal, agreements like contract, issue logs can be used for solution requirements. Current process flows, business processes, business rules repositories are interface documentation, policies and procedures for project requirements, regulatory documents for quality requirements. Decision making. We have seen this technique multiple times. Remember, this technique applies to any decision making process in the project. In this case, it is referring to decisions to deal with requirements. For example, if there is no agreement on one of the requirements between two key stakeholders, then you cannot include this requirement in current form in the requirements document. To deal with this situation, you may use decision-making techniques like multi-criteria decision analysis, voting, and autocratic decision-making. Multi-criteria decision analysis provides a systematic approach to evaluate and rank many ideas or requirements. Once the analysis is complete, then it is time to make a decision. Voting is a collective decision-making technique and an assessment process having multiple alternatives. The decision might be based upon unanimity, where everyone agrees, majority, where more than 50% of members supports your idea, and plurality, where the largest block of votes in a group decides the outcome. And finally, autocratic decision making is the process where one individual takes a responsibility of making the decision for the group. Data representation. There are two techniques used here, affinity diagrams and mind mapping. Let's look at each. Affinity diagrams. It allows large number of ideas to be classified into groups for review and analysis. Affinity diagram technique takes the data that are generated in the brainstorming process and classify them into logical groups. You can use this technique when you have large volume of data to go through and you want to stimulate idea generation and new pattern of thinking. You can avoid this technique when the data sets available are small in numbers, maybe less than 15. Mind mapping. It takes ideas that are generated in the brainstorming process and then tie them together into mind map by commonality and can be categorized together. Technique is used for thinking through a complex problem, summarizing information, or sometimes note-taking, to consolidate information from different research sources, or maybe to present information showing overall structure of your subject to key stakeholders. And finally, it also can help you to generate new ideas. Interpersonal and team skills. These tools and technique requires interpersonal and team related skills and usually use moderator or facilitator. These are nominal group techniques, facilitation, observation, conversation. Let's look into each one by one. Facilitation. These are focus sessions that brings key stakeholders together to define product requirement. Generally, cross-functional team members are involved. It can quickly define cross-functional requirements. It also helps in early issue discovery and resolution due to participation of cross-functional team. Technique can be useful for reconciling stakeholder differences. What are the benefits of this workshop? They are useful in building trust, foster relationship, and improve communication. The example of these focus sessions are joint application development, quality function deployment used in engineering, user stories, mostly used in information technology projects. Let's understand each of them in detail. Joint application design development are mostly known as JAD sessions. These are used in software development industry. It helps bring SME and development team together. Quality function deployment QFD, mostly used in engineering, for example manufacturing industry. These sessions can determine critical characteristics for a new product. The process starts by collecting customer needs, also referred as a voice of customer VOC. These needs are then objectively sorted and prioritized. User stories used in agile project methodologies where required functionality of a product is described in the form of user stories. User story describes the stakeholder who benefit from the features, that's a role. What the stakeholder needs to accomplish, that's a goal. The benefit to the stakeholder, that's a motivation. Generally in the agile, project starts with a theme which get divided into epics, and each epic is divided into multiple user stories. Observation conversation. Let's start with the example. What happens when you ask any operations manager, is there any problem with your operations? Most of the time, answer will be no. Many people do their jobs automatically, so it may be easier to observe what they are doing rather than asking people to describe what they do. A lot of time, people cannot articulate processes or their requirement. Observation provides a direct way of viewing individual in their environment, performing their job and carrying out processes. You can generate ideas on a proposed new product or service by observing individuals or group using the current product or service and see how the process works and how they perform their job. Problem with this method is generally observer sees what he expects to see, and there can be horse run effect, which means there will be a short-term improvement in observing worker when worker knows that someone is observing him. Nominal group technique. It takes the ideas that were generated in brainstorming process and then rank them based upon the voting process. There are 4 steps to this process. Step 1, a question or problem is posted to the group. Each person generates and writes their ideas. Step 2, the moderator collects the ideas. He or she will arrange, write them on a flip chart or whiteboard. Step 3, each idea is discussed with the entire group. Step 4, voting is done to prioritize the idea. The highest scoring ideas are selected. Context diagram. It shows the business system in which the new product or service will operate. It also shows how people and processes interact and work together. Take a look at this context diagram of a payroll system. It shows scope and boundaries of a payroll system at a glance. It shows how employee and human resource department interact together with the payroll system. It also shows interaction between various components like insurance, banks, and other government entities. This is business-friendly diagram. There is no need of technical knowledge to understand this diagram. Prototypes. If you are not confident about the requirement or developing something new, then prototype can be used to gather requirements. A working model of expected product can be developed to get early feedback on these requirements. It's an iterative process. It goes through mock-up creation stage, user experimentation, feedback generation, and prototype revision. Process continues till enough feedback cycles are performed. Once the requirements have been collected, analyzed, prioritized, and decided, they are put into some sort of documentation. For example, in software development, document may be called as business requirement document, business specifications, or system requirement documents. After approval on the prototype, project is moved to design phase. Using collect requirement tools and technique, we have not just collected requirements, but analyzed and prioritized them. Now it's time to finally document the requirements. The output of collect requirement process are requirements documentation and requirement traceability matrix. Requirements documentation. It describes how individual requirements meet the business need for the project. Requirement document may contain many types of requirements like business requirement, stakeholder requirement, solution requirement, transition requirement, project requirement, quality requirement. It may vary based upon the industry in which you are executing the project. It will also have assumptions, dependencies, and constraints. For example, in software development project, this document might be called as BRS, a business requirement specification, or reporting requirements document. Requirement traceability matrix. It is a grid that links product requirement to their origin and to the deliverable that satisfy this requirement. Origin means here how they are originated from project charter, from the business case, who are those stakeholders who had given this requirement, or is it linked to regulatory requirement, etc. Requirement traceability matrix help link the requirements to the business value by linking to the business and project objective. It also helps track requirement throughout the project lifecycle and helps in customer business acceptance. RTM is a framework for managing changes to the product scope throughout the project. Imagine one of the stakeholders comes to you asking some modification to the requirement. And then you refer to the RTM and then you find it out, well, this is the same stakeholder who had given this requirement earlier. Definitely, you will have more power, more reasons to discuss and fight with that stakeholder based upon whether that change is really required or not. Typical attributes used in the requirement traceability matrix are identification, which is a unique identifier, requirements description, source from where requirements are originated, owner, who is managing this particular requirement, usually someone on the project team or subject matter expert, deliverables, what are the deliverables that satisfy the requirement, whether requirement is included into product design, whether it is included into development, what is the current status like approved, cancel, active, assigned, completed, what is the priority of this requirement, and what are the acceptance criteria. Above information on RTM gets updated throughout the project lifecycle. Great job. We have completed collect requirements process here. Let's do a quick review about the topic covered so far. So we started with understanding what is requirement. We gone through different types of requirement like stakeholder requirement, business requirement, functional, non-functional requirement. We discussed various tools and techniques. For example, focus group, facilitation, observation, and conversation. We also talked about prototypes and context diagram. And then we discussed what do you mean by requirement document, what are the content of it, and what is a traceability matrix and how it helps us in managing the project. Keep learning. See you in next session, define scope process.